Welcome back to Plato-Senpai, where we philosophically analyze anime and maybe teach you something along the way. This is the final installment of our series on philosophy in Mirai Nikki, where we finally get to the big question everyone probably asks themselves all the way through the show. Does Yuno actually love Yuki? There are already several videos on this subject, but naturally I want to approach this from a philosophical standpoint. As always, there are spoilers about this series in this video, so you have been duly warned. So let's get a good overview of how the relationship between Yuki and Yuno played out throughout Mirai Nikki. The timeline, so to speak, of the relationship between the simpering Nimrod and the yandere par excellence doesn't exactly make sense until it is later explained in the series that yandere-chan over here fixated herself on Nimrod-kun immediately following the death of her parents. Considering that she is the one who killed her own parents, I don't think that even the loneliest otaku would want Yuno's attention to suddenly fall on him under any circumstance. Who am I kidding? Anyway, this beautiful and endearing love story plays out like this. Yuno kills her abusive mother and negligent father and then latches onto Yuki. The survival games come around and they survive until the end, having presumably fallen in love in the process. Unwilling to kill each other and become God, they make a suicide pact and decide to overdose together. Unfortunately, Yuki dies while Yuno does not, meaning that she ends up the winner of the game. In her anguish, she decides to go back in time and do it all over again, this time making sure that Yuki does not die. But this time, Yuki discovers the truth of the two universes and decisively turns against Yuno. Or at least, against this Yuno. He's all about the third Yuno, whom he thinks still has a chance at not going insane. By now, the Yuno we have all come to know and fear and maybe secretly love if we are masochists, has turned against Yuki. But once she sees the lengths to which he would go to save the better version of herself, she has a change of heart. Precisely the heart which she then decides to stab. Effectively, the story ends there, at least as far as those two are concerned. Looking back on the unfathomably brutal lengths to which Yuno went to defend Yuki, as well as the supreme obsessiveness, we have to ask the question, does Yuno really love Yuki, or is she just obsessed with him? We can't answer that question until we acknowledge that it was never about Yuki in the first place. Yuno's fixation on Yuki has a deeper meaning. One possible explanation for Yuno's affection toward Yuki comes from a French philosopher named Jean-Paul Sartre. In his magnum opus, Being and Nothingness, he takes a very pessimistic look at love. To him, love was a game of power and domination, and ultimately the means by which one uses the other to ground himself in a world that does not want him. This might sound like the bitter ravings of a man who was rejected by the last woman left at the last bar in the world at closing time, but thankfully he has over 400 pages of extremely dense ontology prior to this rant to prove otherwise. Let's try to make all that as simple as possible. First, recall from the last video that an ontological property is a property that applies directly to the very being of a thing. So, ontology is the study of being itself. Within the world of being, humans are unique insofar as they possess self-consciousness, but that comes with a disadvantage. Whenever consciousness is directed at something, which is all the time, it has to create a little empty space so it can do its thing. Sartre calls this nihilation, not annihilation, just nihilation. So when consciousness is turned back onto the self, it splits the self in half, so to speak, because it wedges a big old bunch of nothingness in there so it can work. This means that unlike other things in the world, humans are not identical with themselves because humans don't have the same wholeness of being that other things do. However, just like the other things, humans have facticity and contingency, meaning that they are in a definite place and time, and that they did not have to exist yet still do. This puts a double bind on humans. On the one hand, they transcend the world of other things because they alone have self-consciousness. On the other hand, that consciousness makes them aware of the fact that they are just as limited and just as unnecessary as everything else. The result is that human beings deeply sense that existence itself is absurd and meaningless, and that because self-consciousness makes them unique from everything else, they are alienated from being itself. To To put it simply, humans are stuck in a pointless existence that doesn't want them anyway, and they would do anything to be whole. I know this is a really depressing outlook on life, but it partially fits the character of Yuno. First, Yuno's mother pours all her feelings of uselessness and inadequacy onto Yuno through the form of physical and verbal abuse. Even though the show does explain that Yuno's mother is suffering from severe depression, this is not incompatible with Sart's perspective that she is enduring what he calls anguish, and also what he calls shame. Anguish is what a person experiences when he is faced with his own inescapable freedom, and shame is what a person experiences when faced with another person. So, Yuno's mother is ashamed about her perceived inadequacy in relation to others, and she experiences anguish because she cannot escape a freedom that cannot overcome that perceived inferiority. This manifests as her depression and abuse. Yuno, in turn, feels ashamed that she cannot do anything right, according to her mother, and also feels the same anguish over the fact that her freedom is incapable of living up to her mother's standards. So when she kills her parents, she does so to overcome the shame and anguish. But this leaves her alone in the world, and makes her extra vulnerable to the experience of her own facticity and contingency. This direct feeling of the absurdity of one's own existence, and of all existence, is what Sartre calls nausea. To escape the feeling of nausea, Yuno must now do something that will connect her to being in a concrete and meaningful way. This is where Yuki comes in. By falling unconditionally in love with Yuki and virtually submitting herself to him, she opens herself up to be objectified by him. In this case, to be objectified is to be reduced to the level of an object by the consciousness of the other. But by becoming an object like those in the rest of the world, she can finally find that connection to and acceptance by being that she can't have as a human subject. On the other hand, by defending Yuki at all costs, aka going totally yandere, she guards Yuki as her object. Now we are back to Sartre's conception of love. By reducing Yuki to the position of an object, Yuki turns into something accepted by being itself, and through owning him as an object, she can connect to that very same being from which she is fundamentally isolated as a subject. The point here is that the yandere is able to play both parts at once as a kind of double insurance policy for finding a stable place in the universe of being, and Yuno does this all too well. Having even inherited the position and power of Deus Ex Machina does not satisfy her, which makes sense considering that we already proved that Deus isn't God anyway. As I stated in the first video, Yuno is callous to killing other people, because she already went through the game once before and won. But it now appears that the deeper reason why Yuno so nonchalantly slaughters others is because she is desperate to plant herself firmly in being. It is this motivation that constitutes Yuno's love for Yuki, if you consider love from Sartre's standpoint. I suspect most of you will vehemently disagree with Jean-Paul Sartre's ideas on what love really is, and I don't blame you. But it does provide somewhat of an explanation for Yuno's supposed love for Yuki, and provides a theory for the figure of the yandere in general, even if the theory is kind of abstract and technical. More importantly, what we can take away from this theory is that we need to examine the reasons why we love somebody, because sometimes our love for another has nothing to do with the other and everything to do with ourselves. Thank you all so much for watching. This concludes our series on philosophy in Mirai Nikki. I hope you all enjoyed this video and the whole series. Let me know in the comments which series you want to see me discuss next. As always, if you like this video, you know the rules of YouTube etiquette. Like and subscribe. And of course, don't forget to comment and share this video. I hope you all learned something, and I will see you in the next video. Stick around.